NHL players are headed back to the Olympics for the first time since 2014, and every PWHL team had women named to Olympic rosters. But there are a couple of differences when it comes to Olympic ice hockey than what you're used to watching in those leagues. Welcome back to Olympic Winter is Coming, the series where I'm telling you everything you need to know to get ready for the games in February. When it comes to gameplay, the basics are pretty much the same. Every game in this tournament is played in 3 20-minute periods, and of course the goal is to score more goals than your opponent by the end of regulation. However, if the game is tied at the end of regulation, the way Olympic overtime works is a little bit different than you may be used to seeing. If the game being played is in the preliminary round, we go into a 5-minute sudden death overtime period, meaning that the first team to score in that overtime period wins the game even if the clock has not run out. If we're in a semifinal or quarterfinal game, that overtime period goes from 5 minutes to 10 minutes. Overtime is played as 3-on-3 rather than 5-on-5. If the game is still tied at the end of that overtime period, we go into a shootout. Each side names 5 players to participate in that shootout, and we go back and forth with each of those individual 5 players going one-on-one with the opposing team's goalie. But if we're still tied at the end of that shootout, we go back and forth until someone wins, and the teams are no longer restricted to the 5 players that they named for the shootout. So they can not only send any player from their roster onto the ice, but after those initial 5, they can send the same player out more than once. This came up pretty famously at the 2014 games, the last time that NHL players were on Olympic rosters. During a preliminary game between Team USA and Team Russia, the overtime shootout went 8 rounds, and TJ Oshie actually scored 4 goals, taking Team USA across the finish line for that win. However, overtime rules do change in Olympic hockey when we're talking about a medal game. Whether it's for a bronze, silver, or gold medal, we no longer go to a shootout. Instead, if one of these medal games is tied at the end of regulation, we go into a full 20-minute overtime period rather than the 5 and 10-minute limits that we have in previous rounds. This overtime period is still sudden death, meaning the first to score wins, and it's still 3-on-3. But if at the end of that overtime period we're still tied, we don't go to a shootout. Instead, we continue adding on 20-minute periods until the game is won on the ice. This rule was actually changed on the women's side after the 2018 games, where Team USA beat Team Canada for the gold medal after a 6-round shootout. And of course, one of the big differences in Olympic ice hockey is that there is no fighting allowed. If players do engage in fisticuffs, they may find themselves ejected from the game. Otherwise, penalties and gameplay are pretty similar to what you're used to seeing in the NHL or the PWHL. With the NHL and PWHL sending players to these games, for this 2-week period, we now have players that are used to being teammates playing as rivals, and rivals that now become teammates representing their countries. And on the women's side, we even have an engaged couple playing for 2 different countries. And of course, you can't talk about women's ice hockey without talking about the Team USA Team Canada rivalry, given the fact that since the women's tournament started in 1998, the gold medal has only ever been won by one of those 2 countries. If you'd like a breakdown of how the tournament works, be sure to look at the earlier video from this series where I broke this down. For more breakdowns like this, stories of which athletes you should be watching, and of course coverage of the rest of the winter games, be sure to follow along for the rest of Olympic Winter is Coming.